So I think the 1996 MLS Cup is still the best MLS Cup. It was so unique, not just because it was the first one, but because of the conditions. You're playing in a nor'easter. You have to get the game in because it's the first cup on national TV. You have a time slot that you have to hit, and you're playing through puddles. All of that combined to create a game that I don't think has ever been matched. There's so much that spun off of that game that I think gave Major League Soccer the compelling finish to its first season that I don't think has ever been topped.
And Onalfo have an eye on him. Towards the post, loose in the area, shot by Mendon, for the goal!
Major League Soccer gets its start a couple years after the 1994 World Cup. They waited an extra year to make sure everything was right. So they launch in an Olympic year, which can always be chaotic. You were, at risk, in some ways of being upstaged by the U.S. women's national team, who won the first women's gold medal in an Olympics in Athens, Georgia. You also had, the NBA still kind of at the height of its powers. The NFL was huge. The World Series with the Yankees, Atlanta, New York in a World Series is going to be a big deal. So MLS getting started in that atmosphere was challenging. And with 10 teams launching from scratch, I think expectations were maybe a little low. The season was a fun season to watch if you're a soccer fan. I think they were able to grab the passionate soccer audience in the United States. But as it built towards the playoffs and the final, you saw DC United and the LA Galaxy kind of take that step past the other 8 teams in the league. DC started out very slow. They got hot as the season went on. LA Galaxy were the class of the Western Conference and ended up winning the conference by 8 points. Seemed to be kind of destined from about midway through that it would be DC and LA in the final. The Galaxy had the best center back pairing in the early days of MLS with Dan Kalichman and Robin Fraser. And those two in front of Jorge Campos, the Mexican goalkeeper, who sometimes moonlighted as a forward. The Galaxy, Eduardo Hurtado El Tanque, the Ecuadorian forward, was one of the early international stars of the league. DC had a lot of South American talent as well, and it was really built around the 2 Bolivians, Marco Echeverri, who was there from the beginning, and Jaime Moreno, who joined in mid-season. Raul Diaz-Arce, probably the greatest goal scorer in El Salvador's national team history, was a big part of that early DC United team as well, but a lot of people remember DC for the 3 American stars, John Harkes, Eddie Pope, Jeff Agus. Eddie Pope went on to become, in my mind, the greatest center back in U.S. national team history. Jeff Agus is a player who has a ton of caps with the national team, was an outstanding left back, one of the most decorated players in Major League Soccer history, and a vital part of this team. John Harkes was really the first premier signing for the team, and he was the captain and the face of DC United in the early days. I remember when the live broadcast comes on ABC and you see everyone in ponchos. It's freezing and raining at the same time. Puddles all over the field to the point that you're wondering how they're going to get the game in and how it's actually going to play out. First memory that most people have is Eduardo Hurtado scoring the opening goal for the LA Galaxy and then doing the airplane dive into the wet turf and sliding about 15 yards past, and everybody else goes sliding past him. Probably thought better of that afterwards because he was probably freezing. But the Galaxy take the 1-0 lead into the half. Chris Armas, who's now managing the New York Red Bulls, scores early in the second half. Looks like it's done and dusted, and the LA Galaxy are going to win the first crown. DC really has to go for it at this point and push everything forward. They get a goal to give them a little bit of life. And Marco Echeverri, I think, really was the superstar here. Tough game for him because couldn't really play beautiful soccer on this waterlogged, freezing cold pitch. But Echeverri found a way, and the story that I always remember is something that he practiced as a kid. And Doug Logan, who was the commissioner of Major League Soccer, asked him about it afterwards, like, how were you able to place some of these set pieces perfectly? And Echeverri talked about when he was growing up in Bolivia, his coach would pour buckets of water on the field and create puddles and ask him to hit dead balls out of them. It was actually funny because you go to the golden goal scenario, you get a corner kick in overtime, you kind of feel like, okay, it's building here. DC scored 2 to tie it. They have all the momentum. Echeverry hits a perfect pinpoint corner to the top of the 6-yard box. Eddie Pope heads it home. He takes off running knowing the game's over. Echeverry and Jaime Moreno are thinking it's extra time. You're playing 30 minutes. So at first, they didn't realize that the game was over. And they talked about that later, how they see the huge celebration like, oh, wait a minute. We just won the trophy. And, I always remember the scenes at the end with Doug Logan handing over the trophy to John Harkes, to Kevin Payne, to Bruce Arena, and lifting it with a huge sea of DC United fans who had made the trip. And then watching the reaction on TV and getting those shots of the trophy being lifted with thousands and thousands of fans behind it. I think that's the number one thing for me that I always remember about it, is an unbelievable ride emotionally watching the game, but those final shots with a trophy and fans, and it felt real at that point. I think MLS would love to have another game that was that exciting and that compelling, which you can't manufacture. You never can plan to have that special moment, that goal in the rain with the swan dive sliding across the field. You can't plan to have that Christian Laettner turnaround jumper in an NCAA tournament. It happens, and it's sports, and that's what we love about it.
On behalf of MLS, I'd like to present the first championship trophy to DC United, Kevin Payne, Bruce Arena, John Harkes, true champions.